My family held an intervention about my love life 6 months after my ex blinded me, and what they said destroyed me more than losing my sight. They called it a family meeting, but when I heard everyone gathering around me in the living room of my parents' house, I knew something was wrong, even though I couldn't see them anymore. Before Kevin threw industrial cleaner in my face, I was finishing my last year of law school and had everything planned out perfectly. I'd broken up with him 3 months earlier because he was getting scary possessive, showing up at my classes, accusing me of cheating when I studied with male classmates, even demanding to put GPS trackers in my bag and car so he could know where I was. The breakup was messy, but I thought it was over until that night in March when I came home from the library and he was waiting in the stairwell of my apartment building. He said if he couldn't have me, then nobody could. Before I knew it, my whole world turned into white, searing pain, screaming, and the smell of industrial acid mixed with my own skin melting. Now I was completely blind and had to undergo 11 surgeries to reconstruct what was left of my face. My nose was mostly gone, my lips were twisted, and the skin that remained was a patchwork of scars and grafts that made children cry when they saw me. I spent my days in physical therapy, counseling sessions, and mobility training with my white cane, living back in my childhood bedroom, and trying to convince myself I could still have some kind of life. So when my family called this meeting, I thought maybe they wanted to talk about me going back to school or moving into an assisted living apartment, not about my love life. My dad cleared his throat and started talking in his careful voice he used for difficult conversations. "Sweetheart, we've all been talking, and we think it's time to discuss your future, specifically your romantic future, because we're worried you're not being realistic about your situation." My sister Janet jumped in, her voice artificially bright like she was selling me something. "Kevin writes to you every single day from prison, and Mom and Dad have been reading his letters. They're beautiful, talking about how sorry he is and how he'll spend his life making it up to you." I felt my stomach drop as my best friend Megan added, "He's the only man who's ever loved you enough to do something that extreme. And yes, it was wrong, but it shows how deep his feelings are, and he still wants you even after everything." My Aunt Rita chimed in about how his family had money and could pay for experimental treatments in Europe that might restore partial vision and maybe help with more reconstruction. And my brother David, my own brother, said the words that made me want to throw up. "We're not saying what he did was right, but you have to admit that no regular guy is going to want to deal with all of this." I could feel him poking around and touching my face. But Kevin already knows what he's getting into. Each new person who spoke made it worse, their voices blending into a chorus of people I loved, telling me that my attacker was my best option. And I realized they'd all been visiting him in prison without telling me. I tried to fight back, my voice shaking as I reminded them that Kevin was the reason I was blind and disfigured, that he'd destroyed my life. But my mother cut me off with that gentle tone she used when I was a child refusing to take medicine. "Sweetheart, remember what happened at the cafe last week? We all heard the barista's voice change when she saw you. She had to call someone else to take your order because she couldn't handle looking at you." My sister added, "Or your dating app matches who ghosted you the second you told them about your face." Suddenly, they were all listing every single rejection, every person who couldn't hide their disgust, every whispered comment I'd pretended not to hear. My dad's voice got soft and he said, "When we visited Kevin last week, he cried looking at your pictures and said you're still the most beautiful woman he's ever seen, that he sees past the scars to the real you underneath." I felt my resolve cracking like ice under weight, and I heard myself whisper, "He really said that?" My mom took my scarred hands in hers and said the words that broke me completely. "He's the only one who doesn't see you as a monster baby, because he sees the girl he fell in love with, and that's the best you can do now." The fight went out of me all at once. I'd yet to meet a single person who accepted me after the accident. Everywhere I went, the room went silent as soon as I walked in. I sensed my own friends laughing with their mouths closed or recording me. So when I heard that someone actually thought I still looked beautiful, I found myself really considering it. Maybe they were right. Maybe someone who loved me enough to destroy me was better than nobody at all. Megan pressed an envelope into my shaking hands. Kevin's old cologne was on the paper and it made my heart jump with fear. But my sister took my hand and said, "Let me read his latest letter. He deserves a second chance after everything he's been through." Janet unfolded the paper and her voice got soft and shaky like she was reading something beautiful, instead of words from the man who burned my face off. She started with how Kevin wakes up every night crying because he sees my face in his dreams, the face from before, and he can't believe what he did to something so perfect. The cologne smell from the envelope was making me sick, and I gripped the arms of my chair so hard my knuckles hurt. Janet kept going, her voice getting more emotional as she read about how Kevin replays that night over and over, wishing he could take it back, how he'd give anything to undo those 5 seconds that destroyed both our lives. She made it sound like some tragic romance instead of attempted murder, and I could feel everyone in the room leaning forward like they were watching a sad movie. My stomach twisted because this was my actual life, my actual blindness, my actual destroyed face, and they were all sitting there getting emotional over Kevin's pain. Janet read the part where Kevin said he watches old videos of us on his phone, the ones from when we first started dating, and he sees past my scars to the real me underneath. He wrote about taking anger management classes twice a week and meeting with the prison chaplain every day because he found God after what he did. My mom squeezed my hand and I heard her sniffle like she was crying, And that's when it hit me that they actually believed this garbage. They'd turned Kevin into some reformed sinner instead of the guy who stalked me for 3 months and threw industrial cleaner in my face when I wouldn't take him back. Janet's voice cracked when she read about how Kevin's therapist says he's made incredible progress, how he's learned to manage his emotions and take responsibility for his actions. I wanted to scream that taking responsibility would mean leaving me alone forever, but my throat felt tight and I couldn't make words come out. The letter went on about how Kevin sees his crime as a blessing in disguise, because it forced him to confront his demons and become the man I always deserved, and I actually felt like I might throw up right there in my parents' living room. I finally found my voice and it came out shaky but loud. I told them this was completely insane, that Kevin didn't just make a mistake or have a bad moment, he tried to murder me and he destroyed my entire life. My dad's voice cut through mine, calm and reasonable, like he was explaining something simple to a child. He said Kevin's therapist confirmed everything in the letter, that Kevin really has made progress and isn't the same person he was 6 months ago. Then my dad dropped the bomb that made my blood go cold. He said they've all been meeting with Kevin's family, not just visiting Kevin in prison, but actually sitting down with his parents to discuss a reconciliation plan. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father had been secretly planning my future with the family of the man who blinded me. My dad kept talking about how Kevin's parents are good people, who are devastated by what their son did, and they want to make things right in any way they can. He said they've been very generous and understanding, and they truly believe Kevin and I belong together despite everything that happened. David jumped in before I could respond, and his voice had that excited tone he gets when he thinks he's figured something out. He told me Kevin's parents already contacted specialists in Germany who've had real success with partial vision restoration in acid attack victims. My brother actually said those words, acid attack victims, like I was some statistic instead of his sister. David explained that these German doctors have new techniques involving stem cells and corneal regeneration, and they've helped people see shapes and light again even years after their injuries. He said Kevin's parents are willing to pay for everything, all the surgeries and treatments and travel and recovery, whatever it takes to give me back some vision. Then he paused and I heard him shift in his chair before he added the condition. They'll pay for everything, but only if I agree to give Kevin another chance, to at least visit him in prison and consider reconciliation. The room went silent and I realized they were all waiting for my reaction, expecting me to jump at the chance to maybe see again. My hands started shaking and I felt trapped in that chair, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me but were basically trying to sell me back to my attacker. Rita's voice came from my left, gentle and persuasive, like she was sharing good news. She explained that Kevin's family owns a medical supply company worth millions, that they're very wealthy and very committed to helping me. She said they've already promised to set up a trust fund for my ongoing care, enough money that I'd never have to worry about medical expenses or accessibility equipment or anything I might need for the rest of my life. Rita kept talking about how generous they're being, how they don't have to do any of this, but they want to because they care about me and feel responsible for what Kevin did. The way she said it made it sound like they were doing me this huge favor instead of trying to buy me like property. I could hear the excitement in her voice as she listed all the things the trust fund would cover, and I realized with horror that my family had already negotiated my price. They'd sat down with Kevin's parents and worked out exactly how much my face and my eyes and my future were worth, and now they were presenting it to me like I should be grateful. Megan's voice surprised me because I'd almost forgotten she was there. She started talking about how hard prison has been for Kevin, how the other inmates found out what he did, and they target him constantly. She said he gets beaten up regularly because prisoners hate guys who hurt women, and he's had to be moved to protective custody twice for his safety. Megan's voice got softer as she described how Kevin's scared all the time, how he can't sleep because he's afraid someone will attack him in his cell. She actually said he suffered too, like getting beat up in prison was somehow equal to being permanently blinded and disfigured. I wanted to scream that Kevin chose to throw acid in my face, that nobody forced him to destroy me, but my throat felt paralyzed and I couldn't make any sound come out. Megan kept going about how Kevin's lost weight and has nightmares and cries during their visits, and I sat there realizing that my best friend felt more sorry for my attacker than she did for me. My mom started crying, those soft hiccuping sobs she does when she's really upset. Her voice came out all watery and broken as she told me she's terrified I'll spend my whole life alone. She said no regular man is going to want to deal with my situation, with my blindness and my face and all the care I need. My mom actually said those words out loud, that no one will want me, and each word hit like a physical punch to my stomach. She kept crying as she talked about lying awake at night worrying about what happens to me when she and my dad are gone. Who will take care of me? Who will love me? Then she said at least Kevin already knows what he's getting into. At least he's seen my face and he still wants me. Her words made me feel like something disgusting that people have to force themselves to accept. Like my own mother saw me as this damaged thing that should be grateful for any attention at all. Part of me wanted to argue, but another part, the part that remembered every person who'd gasped or turned away or couldn't hide their disgust when they saw me, wondered if she was right. Janet's hands pressed the letter into mine and the paper felt heavy and wrong. She told me I didn't have to decide anything right now, that I should just think about it and take my time. But I could hear the expectation in everyone's voices, that weird, excited energy of people who think they've solved a problem. They weren't really giving me a choice. They'd already decided I should get back together with Kevin, and now they were just waiting for me to accept it, like it was inevitable. Janet squeezed my shoulder and said, Kevin deserves a second chance, that everyone makes mistakes, and love means forgiveness. My dad added something about how rare it is to find someone who loves you enough to want you back after everything, and I wanted to laugh at how twisted that sounded. They'd rewritten the whole story in their heads, turned Kevin's attack into some proof of his deep feelings instead of what it really was. I stood up fast and my chair scraped against the floor. I grabbed my cane and started moving toward the hallway, my hands shaking so bad I could barely keep my grip. I heard my mom call after me, but I kept going, counting steps to my bedroom door the way my mobility instructor taught me. Behind me, I could hear them all talking in those lowered voices people use when they think you can't hear, discussing me like I was a problem they needed to solve. Janet said something about me being emotional and needing time to process. David said I was being stubborn and unrealistic about my options. My dad's voice rumbled something about tough love and doing what's best even when it's hard. For the first time since Kevin attacked me, I felt more trapped than I did back when he was stalking me, showing up everywhere I went, demanding to know where I was every minute. At least then I could see the danger coming. Now I was blind and surrounded by people who claimed to love me while pushing me back toward the person who destroyed me. I made it to my bed and lay down still holding Kevin's letter. The cologne smell was everywhere now, filling my nose and making my head spin. I couldn't read the words myself, couldn't see what he actually wrote, and I hated being dependent on Janet's dramatic reading to know what was in it. The smell brought back that night in the stairwell so clearly I could almost feel it happening again. Kevin's voice saying if he couldn't have me then nobody could. The sound of liquid splashing. The split second before the pain hit when I didn't understand what was happening. Then the white-hot agony and the screaming, my screaming, and the chemical smell mixing with burning skin. Kevin had used almost those exact same words in his letter according to Janet, talking about how much he loved me, how he couldn't imagine life without me. My family was actually asking me to go back to the person who permanently blinded me and melted my face because they thought I was too damaged for anyone else to want. I lay there in my childhood bed holding that letter and realized my family saw me the same way strangers did, as something ruined, and pitiful that should take whatever scraps of affection it could get, even from the person who ruined me in the first place. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door opening and the smell of eggs and toast. My mom's footsteps crossed the room and I heard her set a tray on my nightstand. She sat down on the edge of my bed and the mattress dipped under her weight. Her hand touched my shoulder in that soft way she used when I was sick as a kid. She started talking in her gentle voice about forgiveness and how it was the path to healing. She told me Kevin's mother cried the whole time they met, actually sobbing into her hands while begging for a chance to make things right. My mom asked if I really wanted to be the kind of person who held on to bitterness instead of choosing to heal. I pulled my blanket up higher and turned my face away from her voice. She kept going, saying Kevin's mother was a good woman who raised her son wrong but wanted to fix her mistakes. I didn't eat the breakfast and I didn't answer her questions. After a while, she picked up the tray and left, closing the door harder than necessary. I stayed in bed most of the day, listening to the sounds of the house around me. Around noon, I heard voices in the hallway right outside my door. Janet was talking to our parents and her voice carried through the thin wood. She said I was being stubborn and unrealistic about my situation. She told them I needed to accept my new limitations and stop living in some fantasy land where I had options. My dad's voice rumbled something I couldn't make out, and then Janet said something about how I was making this harder on everyone. David joined in, and I heard him say I was being selfish, that the whole family was trying to help me and I was throwing it back in their faces. My mom said something about tough love, and how sometimes you had to be firm with people who couldn't see what was good for them. I pressed my pillow over my head, but I could still hear their voices discussing me like I was a problem that needed solving. Later that afternoon, my dad knocked on my door and came in without waiting for an answer. He sat in the chair near my bed and I could hear him shifting his weight like he was uncomfortable. He started talking about my future and how worried he was about me. He said I would need expensive care for the rest of my life, medical appointments and assistive technology, and maybe home health aides as I got older. He talked about how Kevin's family could provide all of that, how they had the money to make sure I was taken care of properly. His voice got softer, and he said sometimes love meant making practical choices instead of emotional ones. He told me this was my chance at real financial security, that I needed to think about the long term instead of just my feelings right now. I felt something break inside me, and suddenly I was crying. Really crying for the first time since the intervention started. I admitted I was scared of being alone forever. I told him about going to the grocery store last week and hearing a kid ask his mom what was wrong with my face. I talked about how every time I left the house I felt people staring at me, could hear them going quiet when I walked past. My dad moved to sit on the bed and pulled me into a hug. He said that was exactly why Kevin made sense. Kevin already knew what he was getting into. Kevin had accepted me once and he was willing to do it again. My dad's shirt smelled like his aftershave and I cried into it while he patted my back. He said I needed to be realistic about my options now. That evening I heard Megan's voice downstairs and then footsteps coming up to my room. She knocked and came in, her perfume filling the small space. She sat on the bed and told me she brought another letter from Kevin, that this one was even more emotional than the last. She opened the envelope and started reading parts out loud. Kevin wrote about dreaming of taking care of me, about making up for what he did through actions instead of just words. He talked about imagining a future where he proved his love every single day. Megan's voice got shaky reading it like she was moved by his words. She folded the letter and pressed it into my hands. I held the paper and asked her if she really thought I should get back together with someone who blinded me. She was quiet for a few seconds and I could hear her breathing. Then she said Kevin made a terrible mistake, but people could change. She said he was getting therapy in prison and taking classes to be a better person. Then her voice got harder and she added that my dating profile got 0 matches after I posted honest photos of my face. She asked what other choice I really had. I felt the letter crumpling in my grip. Megan stayed a while longer talking about how rare it was to find someone who wanted you after something like this. After she left, I lay in the dark holding both of Kevin's letters. That night, I barely slept. Kevin's words from both letters kept spinning in my head, mixed with everything my family said. Part of me felt sick thinking about getting back together with him. I remembered the pain of the acid hitting my face and the smell of my skin burning. But another part of me was so desperate for someone to accept me that I found myself considering it. I thought about being alone in my childhood bedroom for the rest of my life. I thought about how my own family believed I had no other options. Maybe they were right. Maybe someone who destroyed me was better than nobody at all. The next day, I told my mom I wanted to talk to my old therapist from the hospital. Dr. Sarah had helped me right after the attack when I was learning to live without sight. My mom's voice got tight and cold. She said that therapist had filled my head with victim mentality and made me think I was helpless. But she said she would allow one session if it helped me process things and move forward. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor. 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Sarah's office, and the moment I started explaining the intervention, her voice changed completely. She stopped me after I described my family reading Kevin's letters and told me directly that what they were doing was abuse. She said they were trying to force me back into a relationship with my attacker. I felt my throat get tight, and I tried to explain that they just wanted what was best for me. Dr. Sarah cut me off and said no family that wanted what was best would pressure someone to reconcile with the person who blinded them. She asked me to describe exactly what happened at the intervention, and I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she started talking about something called trauma bonding. She explained how my family was using my vulnerability to push their own agenda. Then she asked if I had considered that they might benefit financially from Kevin's family's wealth. The words hit me like cold water. I thought about David mentioning the job offer. I remembered my dad talking about expensive care, and Kevin's family paying for treatments. Dr. Sarah said my family had made deals with Kevin's family behind my back, and now they were trying to deliver me like I was part of a business arrangement. Everything suddenly clicked into a darker pattern, and I realized my family had been negotiating my future for their own benefit. I took a cab home from Dr. Sarah's office because I couldn't stand the thought of asking my mom for a ride after what I'd just learned. My hands shook the whole way as I gripped my white cane, and when I walked through the front door, I heard my mom's footsteps coming fast from the kitchen. She asked how therapy went, and her voice had that fake cheerful tone that meant she already knew something was wrong. I told her exactly what Dr. Sarah said, that my family was trying to force me back with my attacker, that they'd made deals behind my back. My mom's voice changed instantly, and she started yelling that Dr. Sarah was a troublemaker who didn't understand family loyalty. She said therapists like that filled vulnerable people's heads with paranoid ideas and turned them against the people who actually loved them. I tried to explain that Dr. Sarah was just helping me see the truth, but my mom cut me off and said I wasn't allowed to see that woman again. She told me Dr. Sarah was poisoning my mind against people who only wanted what was best for me, and if I kept seeing her, I'd end up completely alone with nobody. I felt my stomach drop because I realized my mom saw Dr. Sarah as a threat to whatever plan they'd made with Kevin's family. My mom kept going, saying real families stuck together through hard times and didn't let outsiders come between them. She said I was influenced by someone who didn't know our situation and didn't care about my future the way they did. I went to my room and shut the door, my whole body shaking with anger and fear. I lay on my bed trying to process everything when I heard my brother David's footsteps coming down the hall hours later after it got dark outside. He knocked once and came in without waiting for an answer. His voice sounded different from usual, harder and more aggressive than I'd ever heard it. He sat on the edge of my bed and told me Kevin's dad had offered him a job at their medical supply company. The job paid almost double what he made now and came with benefits and stock options. Then his voice got even colder, and he said, if I messed this up for the family, he would never forgive me. I felt sick as I realized my brother was threatening me over a job offer from my attacker's family. David said Kevin's dad was only offering the position because they were trying to build bridges between our families, and if I kept refusing to cooperate, the whole deal would fall apart. He told me I needed to think about someone besides myself for once, and consider how my choices affected everyone else. I asked him if he seriously expected me to get back together with Kevin, so he could have a better job. David was quiet for a second, and then he admitted something that made my blood run cold. He said our parents were drowning in my medical bills from all the surgeries and treatments after the attack. Kevin's family had offered to pay everything retroactively, every single bill, if I agreed to give Kevin another chance. I realized with complete horror that my family had been negotiating deals with Kevin's family behind my back for months. This wasn't about my romantic future or my happiness at all. This was about their financial futures and what they could get out of Kevin's family's money. David kept talking and said the medical bills were over $200,000, and our parents had taken out a second mortgage on the house to cover them. Kevin's family offering to pay it all off would save our parents from losing everything. He made it sound like I owed it to them to cooperate after they'd spent so much money on my recovery. I told him that Kevin was the reason I needed all those surgeries in the first place, that it was his fault our parents had those bills. David said that was beside the point now, and we had to deal with reality, not what should have happened. He left my room, and I heard his footsteps going back downstairs. I was still lying there trying to process what he'd said when I heard Janet's lighter footsteps coming up about 20 minutes later. She knocked softly and asked if she could come in, her voice much gentler than David's had been. She sat next to me and took my hand, and I could smell her perfume that she always wore. Janet said she knew David came on too strong and she wanted to try a different approach. She told me Kevin's family was just trying to help, and what was wrong with everyone benefiting from the situation. She said it wasn't like Kevin's family was asking for anything crazy, just a chance for me to talk to Kevin and see if we could work things out. Janet kept using that soft, reasonable voice as she explained how hard this had been on the whole family, not just me. She said Mom and Dad were stressed about money, David was struggling at his dead-end job, and even she was worried about her own student loans. If Kevin's family wanted to help everyone while also helping me get treatments that might restore some vision, why was I being so stubborn about it? She told me I was being selfish by not considering how my choices affected everyone who loved me. Janet said they weren't asking me to marry Kevin tomorrow, just to give him a chance to prove he'd changed. I didn't answer her, and after a while she squeezed my hand and left. I spent the next 2 days locked in my room refusing to eat or talk to anyone. My mom brought food that I barely touched, and I heard her sighing outside my door. I could hear my family discussing me through the walls and vents, their voices carrying up from the living room below. My mom said I was being dramatic and needed tough love to snap out of it. My dad agreed and said maybe they should just set up a meeting with Kevin's parents and make me go. Janet suggested they could drive me there and not tell me where we were going until we arrived. I lay in my bed listening to them plan ways to force me into doing what they wanted, and I felt more trapped than I ever had. On the second day, I heard Aunt Rita's voice downstairs talking to my mom. Her footsteps came up to my room and she knocked, calling my name in her cheerful aunt voice. I didn't answer, but she came in anyway and sat on my bed. She said she'd been doing research on the German treatment Kevin's family mentioned, and it was actually real. The doctors in Berlin had a clinic that specialized in acid attack victims, and they'd had success with partial vision restoration in some cases. Aunt Rita described how the treatment worked using stem cells and new surgical techniques, and she said I could potentially see shapes and light again even if not full vision. Her voice got more serious, and she asked if my pride was really worth staying blind when Kevin's family was offering me a legitimate chance at partial vision. She said she understood I was angry at Kevin, but I needed to think practically about my future. Aunt Rita told me I was young and had my whole life ahead of me, and turning down a chance to see again just because I was mad seemed like cutting off my nose to spite my face. She stayed for a while longer trying to convince me, but I kept my face turned toward the wall. After she left, I lay there thinking about what she said, and hating that part of me wanted to believe it was possible. But then I remembered Dr. Sarah's words about my family exploiting my vulnerability, and I knew I needed help from someone outside this house. I got up and felt my way to the phone in the hallway using my cane. I called information and asked for disability services in my area. The operator was patient and connected me to a support center, and a woman answered saying this was the Community Resource Center. I asked if they had services for assault survivors with disabilities, and the woman said yes and transferred me to someone named Kira, who ran support groups. Kira's voice was warm when she answered, and I started explaining my situation, stumbling over the words about my family and Kevin and the pressure to reconcile. Kira didn't sound shocked at all as I talked. She told me this happened more often than people thought, that families sometimes pressured disabled victims to reconcile with their abusers because they saw them as burdens. Her matter-of-fact tone about it made me feel less crazy for the first time in days. Kira said she'd worked with dozens of women in similar situations where families prioritized their own needs over the victim's safety and recovery. She asked me a few questions about my living situation and support system, and I admitted I was living with my parents and had basically no one on my side. Kira invited me to a support group meeting the next evening and said she could send a mobility instructor to help me get there independently if I needed it. For the first time in days, I felt like someone was treating me as capable instead of helpless. She gave me the address and meeting time and said she looked forward to meeting me in person. I hung up feeling something like hope starting to grow in my chest. I went back to my room, and that evening at dinner I told my mom I was going to a support group meeting tomorrow. My mom's voice got sharp immediately and she asked if this was the one Dr. Sarah recommended. When I said yes, she told me I wasn't allowed to go. She said I was influenced by people who didn't know our family situation and didn't understand what we were trying to do for me. My mom added that support groups like that just made people more bitter and angry instead of helping them move forward with their lives. I pushed myself up from the bed and felt my way to the doorway where I could hear my mom still standing in the hall. I told her I was an adult, and I was going to that meeting tomorrow whether she liked it or not. The silence that followed felt heavy and cold, and when my mom finally spoke, her voice had changed completely from the gentle tone she'd been using. She said fine, if I wanted to go, so badly then I could find my own way there because she wasn't going to drive me anywhere to meet with people who would turn me against my own family. I heard her footsteps going down the hall, and her bedroom door closing hard enough to make the walls shake. I went back into my room and sat on the edge of my bed trying to stop my hands from shaking, because I'd never talked to my mom like that before, not even when I had my sight and my independence. The next morning, I got up early and felt my way to the phone in the hallway, using the skills my mobility instructor had taught me during rehab. I called information and asked for paratransit services, and the operator connected me to a scheduling line where I explained I needed a ride to an address across town for that evening. The person taking my information was patient and professional, confirming my pickup time and location without making me feel helpless or broken. My family barely spoke to me all day, and when evening came, I heard my mom telling my dad in the kitchen that I was making a huge mistake. I ignored them and waited by the front door with my cane until I heard the paratransit van pull up outside. Getting into the van by myself felt scary, but also good in a way I hadn't felt since before the attack, like I was taking back some small piece of control over my own life. The driver helped me find my seat and told me we'd be there in about 20 minutes, and I spent the whole ride feeling proud of myself for doing this alone. When we arrived at the community center, I used my cane to navigate from the van to the building entrance, counting steps and listening for the sound of the automatic doors. Inside, a woman's voice asked if I was here for the support group, and when I said yes, she told me her name was Kira, and she was glad I'd made it. She guided me down a hallway to a room where I could hear other people talking quietly, and as we entered, the conversation stopped for just a second before continuing. Kira introduced me to the group, and I heard 4 different women's voices welcoming me, and not one of them gasped or changed their tone when they saw my face. 2 of the women mentioned they were also blind from partner violence, and another woman came over and took my hand to guide it to her face so I could feel scars similar to mine. For the first time since the attack, I was in a room where nobody was staring at me with horror or pity, where my injuries were just understood as part of what had happened to us. When it was my turn to share, I told them about the intervention and how my family wanted me to reconcile with Kevin because they thought no one else would want me. The room went completely silent for a moment, and then one woman said her parents had done almost the same thing, pressuring her to go back to her ex-husband who'd beaten her so badly she lost hearing in one ear. Another woman shared how her sister kept telling her she was being unreasonable by refusing to forgive the boyfriend who'd thrown her down the stairs and paralyzed her legs. A third woman talked about her mother visiting her attacker in jail and trying to arrange meetings without her permission, and I realized with relief and sadness that I wasn't alone in this nightmare. After the meeting ended, Kira came over with a man she introduced as her husband Brian, and he told me he was a disability rights attorney who worked with assault survivors. Brian explained that what my family was doing could actually be considered coercion, especially since they were using my dependency on them to pressure me into contact with my attacker. He said I had legal rights they were violating and he'd be happy to consult with me for free about my options. I took his card and thanked him, feeling something like hope starting to build in my chest for the first time in weeks. The paratransit driver picked me up at 9, and by the time I got home it was almost 10, way past when my family usually went to bed. But when I came through the front door, I could hear them all waiting in the living room, and my dad's voice cut through the darkness demanding to know where I'd been and what I'd talked about. I told him I went to a support group and met other women who'd survived attacks like mine, and my sister Janet made a scoffing sound and said those women were probably just bitter and alone, poisoning my mind against people who actually cared about me. My mom's voice was tight when she told me she'd called Kevin's mother while I was gone, and they'd arranged a meeting for this weekend at a restaurant halfway between our houses. I felt my stomach drop and I said I never agreed to meet with them, but my mom cut me off saying I was being unreasonable, and I owed them at least a conversation after everything their family had offered to do for me. I barely slept that night thinking about being forced into a room with Kevin's parents, and first thing the next morning I dug out Brian's card and called his office. When he answered, I explained what my family was trying to do, and Brian told me clearly that I had every right to refuse this meeting and no one could force me to attend. He offered to come with me as my legal advocate if I wanted to go but needed support, and I felt the panic in my chest ease just a little, knowing I had someone on my side. That afternoon, I told my family I would only go to the meeting if Brian came with me as my attorney, and my dad exploded asking why I needed a lawyer for a simple family discussion. His anger at the mention of legal representation made me more certain than ever that I needed Brian there, because people who have nothing to hide don't get mad about lawyers being present. My mom tried a different approach after my dad's yelling didn't work, and I heard her crying as she told me I was tearing the family apart and making everything so much harder than it needed to be. She said Kevin's family would think we were being hostile if I brought a lawyer, that it would ruin any chance of working things out peacefully. But I stayed firm and told her Brian came with me, or I wasn't going at all. And I heard my mom leave the room still crying while my dad muttered about how I'd changed into someone they didn't recognize anymore. 3 days later, I sat in a booth at the restaurant Brian chose, my hands gripping my cane while I listened to footsteps approaching our table. I heard Kevin's parents arrive first, and the way their voices stopped mid-greeting when Brian introduced himself as my attorney made the tension in the air thick enough to feel. Kevin's father cleared his throat and started talking in this rehearsed way that reminded me of a business presentation, going on about how their son was filled with remorse and how they wanted to help me through financial support for my ongoing medical needs. His voice was smooth and practiced, like he'd said these exact words to a mirror before coming here. Brian let him finish before asking what specific expectations they had in return for this financial assistance, and the silence that followed told me everything. Kevin's mother jumped in with a softer approach, her voice shaking as she explained that they hoped I would consider visiting their son in prison, because he was devastated that I wouldn't read his letters or respond to any of his attempts to communicate. She made it sound like I was being cruel by not engaging with the man who threw acid in my face, Brian asked more questions about the terms of their offer, and Kevin's father mentioned the German treatment again, adding that they'd already contacted specialists who were ready to evaluate me as soon as I agreed to come. But when Brian pushed for details about what would happen if the treatment failed, or if I still refused to reconcile with Kevin afterward, both parents got defensive, and Kevin's father said they were just trying to help and didn't appreciate being interrogated. I felt my hands start shaking, and I finally spoke up, my voice coming out stronger than I expected, as I asked them directly if they understood that their son tried to murder me, that he permanently destroyed my vision and my face and my entire future. Kevin's mother started crying immediately, and said it was a moment of temporary insanity brought on by the stress of our breakup, that Kevin wasn't a monster and he'd been getting help in prison. She kept saying he was sick that day, like throwing industrial cleaner in someone's face was just a bad cold he caught. I heard Brian shift in his seat and his voice went cold and professional as he stated clearly that I wasn't interested in any form of reconciliation, and that all future contact attempts needed to go through him as my legal representative. Kevin's parents both started talking at once, their voices rising as they said I was being unreasonable and throwing away a chance at a better life. But Brian stood up and I felt his hand on my elbow guiding me out of the booth. I could hear my own family's furious whispers as we walked to the parking lot, their voices carrying across the restaurant about how I'd embarrassed them and ruined everything. The drive home with my parents were completely silent for the first 10 minutes, until my dad finally said I'd just thrown away my only chance at a normal life, and did I realize what I'd done. I told him that getting back together with my attacker wasn't normal, and he made this disgusted sound before saying that beggars can't be choosers given my situation. My mom didn't say anything during the drive, but I could hear her crying quietly in the front seat. When we got back to the house, I went straight to my room, but my mom followed me in and told me I needed to start looking for somewhere else to live if I was going to reject help and make everything harder for the family. Her voice wasn't sad anymore. It was cold and matter-of-fact, as she explained they couldn't afford to support me forever, and I needed to figure out my own living situation. I felt panic rising in my chest because I had no idea how to live independently while blind, and my mom just walked out of my room without another word. I fumbled for my phone and called Kira, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it twice before she answered. She listened while I explained what happened at the meeting and what my mom had just said, and then she told me to hold on while she made another call. 2 minutes later, she was back and said she was connecting me with Alana, a counselor who worked specifically with assault survivors transitioning to independent living. Alana's voice was calm and warm when she came on the line, and she started listing off accessible apartments and financial assistance programs I qualified for that I'd never even heard of before. She said she could help me apply for disability benefits, housing assistance, and vocational training services that would cover most of my living expenses. I felt something like hope starting to push through the panic, as Alana explained how many resources existed that my family had never told me about. Over the next week, Alana met with me every single day, helping me fill out applications and navigate the complicated process of accessing disability services. She brought paperwork and formats I could actually use and read everything out loud to me, explaining each form and what it meant for my future. I learned about monthly disability payments I could receive, subsidized housing programs for people with disabilities, and job training services that would help me find work I could do despite being blind. Every new program Alana told me about made me angrier, because I realized my family had kept me dependent on purpose, never mentioning any of these resources that could have given me independence months ago. My mom barely spoke to me that whole week except to ask when I'd be leaving, and my sister Janet stopped coming by the house completely. Alana helped me apply for everything at once and told me the housing assistance would probably come through first, since there was an accessible building with an opening right now. She described the apartment as a studio in a building designed specifically for residents with disabilities, with other blind and physically disabled people living there, and support services available on site. The rent would be affordable with my assistance payments, and I'd have access to orientation and mobility instructors who could help me learn to navigate my new neighborhood. When Alana told me there was an apartment available and asked if I wanted to apply, I said yes without even thinking about it. 2 days later, she called to say my application was approved, and I could move in at the end of the month. For the first time since Kevin threw acid in my face, I felt excited about my future instead of trapped and hopeless. I had my own place waiting for me, money coming in to cover my expenses, and people who actually wanted to help me succeed instead of keeping me small and dependent. The apartment was mine, and nobody could take it away from me or use it to control me, and that feeling of ownership over my own life made me want to cry with relief. I called my parents that same evening to tell them about the apartment, and my dad answered with his usual tired voice asking what I needed. I told him I found a place to live and would be moving out at the end of the month, and the silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard him calling for my mom and Janet, and suddenly they were all on speakerphone asking what I meant and why I was doing this to them. Janet's voice came through sharp and angry, saying I was abandoning them after everything they'd done for me, after they took me in and cared for me when I was helpless. My mom started crying immediately, her sobs loud and dramatic, saying I was making a huge mistake, and I'd come crawling back when reality hit me. I tried to explain about the disability benefits and housing assistance, about how Alana had helped me access resources I never knew existed, but Janet cut me off and said I was manipulated by strangers who didn't really care about me. My dad's voice was cold when he said I was being selfish and ungrateful, throwing their help back in their faces, and I should think very carefully about burning bridges with my only family. I told them the decision was final and hung up before they could say more, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The next day, David showed up at the house while I was packing boxes in my room, and I heard his footsteps coming down the hall before he even knocked. He pushed my door open and told me Kevin's dad had called him that morning to rescind the job offer at the medical supply company. David's voice was tight with anger as he explained that Kevin's family heard I'd rejected the meeting with their lawyers present, and now they wanted nothing to do with our family. He said I'd cost him a 6-figure salary and benefits, that he'd been counting on that job to finally get ahead, and now it was gone because I couldn't just be reasonable for once. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized my family had been making deals and plans around Kevin's family's money, that this whole thing had never really been about my happiness or well-being. David kept talking, listing all the things my medical bills had cost the family, how they'd sacrificed for me, and now I was costing him opportunities too. I told him to get out of my room, and he slammed the door so hard the whole wall shook, and I heard him downstairs telling my parents I was being vindictive and spiteful. The rest of that week, I avoided my family as much as possible, spending my time at Alana's office or the support group space, and when moving day finally came, Kira showed up with 2 other women from the group and a borrowed van. They helped me carry my boxes and bags down the stairs while my mom watched from the doorway without offering to help, her face set in disapproving lines. My dad had already left for work without saying goodbye, and Janet didn't come out of her room at all. The apartment Alana had found was perfect, a studio space in a building designed specifically for residents with disabilities, with wide doorways and accessible features throughout. Kira and the other women helped me unpack and organize everything, placing furniture where I could navigate easily with my cane, and Alana had already set up tactile markers and labels so I could find things independently. It was small, but it was mine, completely mine, and nobody could use it to control me or make me feel like I owed them anything. When everyone left that evening, I sat on my new couch in my own apartment and felt that same relief wash over me again, mixed with loneliness, but also freedom. My family stopped calling after I moved out, and the silence felt strange at first, like a constant background noise had suddenly cut off. I kept expecting my mom to call with some emergency, or my sister to text asking for something, but days passed with nothing. Then a week later, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan, just one message saying I was selfish for pushing everyone away, and I'd regret it when I ended up alone. She said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and nobody would be there to pick up the pieces when it all fell apart. Before I could respond, another message came through saying she was blocking my number, and I shouldn't try to contact her again. I stared at my phone screen for a long time after that, using the voice reader to hear the messages over and over, and part of me wanted to call her back and apologize. But the bigger part of me felt relieved that I didn't have to pretend anymore with people who thought Kevin was my best option. Alana connected me with Austin a few days later, Kira's son who worked with accessibility technology for people with visual impairments. He came to my apartment with bags full of equipment and spent hours setting everything up, explaining each piece as he worked. He installed screen readers on my laptop and phone that would read everything out loud in a natural voice, voice-activated systems that let me control lights and appliances by speaking, and apps that helped me identify objects and navigate spaces independently. Austin showed me how to use each tool patiently, never making me feel stupid when I asked him to repeat instructions, and by the end of the day, I felt more capable than I had in months. I could check my email, browse websites, even read books again using the technology, and the world suddenly felt less closed off. Austin said he'd check in weekly to make sure everything was working and teach me new features, and he gave me his number in case I needed help with anything. 2 weeks after moving in, Alana brought a vocational counselor to my apartment, a woman who specialized in helping people with disabilities return to work or school. We sat at my small kitchen table and she asked about my background, my law school experience, what I'd been studying before the attack. I explained about my last year of law school that I'd never finished, how I'd been so close to graduating, and she didn't sound doubtful or pitying when she responded. She told me about adaptive technology for legal work, screen readers that could handle legal documents, voice recognition software for writing briefs, programs designed specifically for blind lawyers and law students. We discussed distance learning programs in schools with strong disability support services, and she said my law career wasn't over unless I wanted it to be. She pulled up information about several programs on her laptop and used my screen reader to show me what was available, and I felt hope starting to build again for the first time since Kevin threw acid in my face. The counselor said she'd help me apply and navigate the accommodation process, that plenty of blind people practice law successfully, and I didn't have to give up on the future I'd planned. 3 months passed in my new apartment. 3 months of learning to navigate independently and building routines that worked for me. I was getting ready for bed one evening when I heard something slide under my door, the soft scrape of paper on tile. I used my cane to find it and picked up an envelope, running my fingers over it until I found the return address label in raised print. My mom's address. I used my phone's camera app to read the letter out loud, and her words came through the speaker in that artificial voice. She wrote that Kevin was up for parole review soon, and his family was very angry that I wouldn't write a support letter for him. She said I was being vindictive and cruel, that Kevin had served his time and deserved a second chance, and my refusal to help him showed how hard my heart had become. The letter went on about forgiveness and moving forward, about how disappointed she was in the person I'd turned into, and I didn't even finish listening before I ripped it up and threw it in the trash. At support group that week, I shared about the letter and my progress over the past 3 months, how I'd been learning to live independently and access resources. The other women celebrated with me, their voices warm and genuinely happy, and one woman who'd been in the group for 2 years spoke up. She told me the first year after cutting off toxic family was the hardest, that I'd doubt myself and feel guilty, but it would get easier with time. She said I was doing everything right by building my own support system and focusing on my own healing instead of managing everyone else's expectations. Kira suggested I might benefit from expanding my social circle beyond the support group, and she told me about a social group for young adults with visual impairments that met twice a month. I went to the next meeting feeling nervous, using my cane to navigate into a community center where I could hear people talking and laughing. Someone greeted me at the door and guided me to a chair, and within minutes I was part of a conversation about accessible technology and funny stories about navigating the world as a blind person. Nobody made a big deal about my scars or acted like I was fragile or broken, and a guy named Marcus ended up sitting next to me for most of the evening. We talked about our lives and interests, and at the end of the night he asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. My immediate reaction was fear, that old voice in my head saying nobody would really want me, but I pushed past it and said yes. The coffee date happened 3 days later at a cafe near my apartment, and Marcus was already there when I arrived, his voice calling out to help me find his table. We talked for 2 hours about everything from our jobs to our families to our favorite music, and he never once made my blindness or scars into a thing that needed addressing. He told me about his work in audio engineering, and asked about my plans to return to law school, treating me like a normal person with a normal life instead of a victim who needed saving. When we left the cafe, he asked if he could see me again, and I realized my family had been completely wrong about nobody ever wanting me. Marcus saw me as a whole person, not just my disabilities or my trauma, and that feeling of being treated normally was better than any promise Kevin's family could have made. A few weeks after that coffee date with Marcus, I got an email from a distance learning program that made my screen reader go crazy with excitement. They accepted me into their law degree completion program, designed specifically for students with disabilities, and I could start the next semester with full accommodations, including audio textbooks, extended test times, and accessible course materials. I sat in my apartment listening to the acceptance letter read aloud 3 times because I couldn't believe it was real, that I was actually going back to finish what Kevin's attack had interrupted. The program coordinator called me the next day to discuss my needs, and she treated the whole thing like it was completely normal, like blind students finished law degrees all the time, and I was just another person working toward their goals. I started telling everyone in my support group about it, and they celebrated with me, sharing their own stories about going back to the school or work after their attacks. Kira hugged me after the meeting and told me this was exactly the kind of progress she loved seeing, that education and independence were the best revenge against people who tried to destroy you. Brian called me 2 days later and asked if I wanted to meet him at his office to discuss something. I took the bus there using my mobility skills, and felt proud navigating the route by myself, and when I arrived, his secretary guided me to his office where he was waiting. He told me he'd been impressed with how I handled the meeting with Kevin's parents, and how I advocated for myself throughout the whole process with my family. Then he offered me a part-time internship at his disability rights firm, helping with research and client intake, working around my class schedule once school started. The pay wasn't much, but it was real legal work, and he said I could use it for my required internship credits toward graduation. I accepted immediately and started the following week, learning how to use legal databases with my screen reader and taking notes during client consultations. The work felt meaningful in a way my old law school classes never had, because I was helping real people navigate systems that weren't designed for them. Brian told me after my first month that I had a real future in disability advocacy law, that my personal experience combined with legal knowledge made me uniquely qualified to help others. 6 months after I left my family's house, I got a notification that Kevin's parole hearing was scheduled, and I had the right to attend via phone to give a victim impact statement. My hands shook when I called the number on the appointed day, and waited on hold listening to generic music until someone transferred me into the hearing room. I could hear Kevin's voice for the first time since that night in the stairwell, and it made my stomach turn, hearing him tell the parole board about his rehabilitation and remorse. Then it was my turn, and I read the statement I'd prepared with Brian's help, explaining in detail how Kevin's attack destroyed my vision and face, how I'd undergone 11 surgeries and would need more, how I'd lost my career path and independence. I talked about the chronic pain from my facial injuries and how I'd never see my own face again, or watch a sunset or read a physical book. Then I added the part about my family's intervention, and how their pressure to reconcile with my attacker had added trauma to my recovery, how Kevin's family had tried to use money to buy my forgiveness. My voice stayed steady through the whole thing, even though I was shaking, and when I finished, there was silence on the line before the board chair thanked me for my statement. The decision came a week later, and Kevin's parole was denied. He would serve his full sentence with no early release, and I felt something release in my chest when Brian called to tell me the news. But 2 days after that, Brian called again saying Kevin's parents had tried to contact me through his office, leaving messages asking me to reconsider reconciliation now that I was doing better. They claimed Kevin's denial was partially my fault because of my statement, and they wanted to discuss how we could all move forward as a family. Brian sent them a cease and desist letter on my behalf that same day, making it clear any further contact would result in a restraining order. He told me Kevin's parents were used to buying their way out of problems, and they couldn't accept that some things weren't for sale. My mom called for the first time in months on a random Tuesday afternoon. Her voice sounded different and smaller than I remembered, less confident and more uncertain. She said she'd been thinking about what happened at that intervention, and maybe they pushed too hard, that she'd been talking to her own therapist about it. But then she added that she still thought they were trying to help me, that their intentions were good, even if their methods were wrong. She asked how I was doing, and if I was managing okay on my own, and I could hear the hope in her voice that I'd admit I was struggling and needed to come back home. I took a breath and told my mom that pressuring me to reconcile with my attacker wasn't help. It was abuse. I explained that good intentions didn't matter, when the actions caused harm, and until she could fully acknowledge what they did was wrong without qualifications or excuses, I wasn't ready to rebuild our relationship. She started crying on the phone, and I heard her say she missed me and didn't understand why I was being so harsh. But she didn't argue with my words or try to defend the intervention anymore, and we ended the call without resolution, but without fighting either. I felt sad after hanging up, but also clear about my boundaries, knowing I couldn't let her back in my life until she truly understood what they'd done. I continued my law studies through the distance program, and kept working at Brian's firm, falling into a routine that felt productive and purposeful. Marcus and I started dating more seriously after a few months, going out twice a week and talking on the phone most nights. He met my support group friends at a social event and fit naturally into my life, joking with them and treating everyone normally without the awkward overcompensation some people did around disabled folks. He treated me as a complete person instead of a victim who needed saving, asking about my work and school and future plans like I was someone with real prospects. We went to concerts where he described the stage setup for me and restaurants where he read me menus without making it a big production. When I told him about my family and the intervention, he got quiet and then said that anyone who loved me should want me safe and happy, not back with someone who tried to kill me. A year after that horrible intervention, I was thriving in ways my family said were impossible. I had my own accessible apartment that I'd decorated myself with help from Kira and the support group, with everything organized so I could find it easily. I was completing my law degree with good grades and positive feedback from professors, working part-time at Brian's firm on cases that mattered, and dating Marcus who respected me and made me laugh. I'd built a life that wasn't defined by what Kevin took from me, but by what I created for myself afterward. The support group women celebrated my 1-year anniversary of independence with cake and stories, and I realized I'd gone from that broken person in my childhood bedroom to someone who was actually happy most days. Janet reached out through a mutual friend saying she wanted to apologize and talk about what happened. The friend passed along Janet's message saying my sister had been doing her own therapy and realized how wrong the intervention was, that she wanted a chance to make things right. But I wasn't ready yet to open that door. Wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. I'd learned through therapy and support group that forgiveness had to be earned through changed behavior, not just words, and I didn't owe anyone access to my life just because we shared DNA. The friend seemed disappointed when I said no, but she understood, and I felt okay with my decision, even though part of me missed my sister. I graduated from law school through the distance program on a sunny Saturday in May. Brian offered me a full-time position at his firm starting the following month, with a real salary and benefits and my own caseload of clients. Kira and my support group friends attended my graduation celebration at a restaurant near my apartment, filling the private room with noise and laughter and congratulations. Marcus brought flowers that he described to me in detail, and Austin gave me an upgraded screen reader as a graduation present. I stood up to make a toast and thanked everyone for believing in me when my own family didn't, for showing me that disability didn't mean the end of dreams, but just a different path to reach them. Brian raised his glass and said I'd built a family of choice that actually supported me, and that was worth more than any biological connection. I felt the truth of his words as I listened to my chosen family celebrate around me, knowing I'd survived something meant to destroy me and came out stronger on the other side. Marcus and I started apartment hunting 3 months after graduation, looking for a place we could design together from scratch. We found a 2-bedroom unit in a building with other disabled residents and spent weeks planning every detail so I could navigate independently without constantly asking for help. We installed tactile markers on all the walls, organized the kitchen with specific zones I memorized, and set up voice-activated controls for lights and temperature. The landlord let us modify the bathroom with grab bars and a walk-in shower, and Marcus described where he put everything so I could find it easily. Moving day felt different from when I left my parents' house because this time I was moving towards something instead of away from something. Kira and Brian helped us unpack, and Austin came by to set up additional accessibility tech he'd been developing. My family still wasn't part of my life, and sometimes that hurt, but I was surrounded by people who loved me without trying to control me or push me back toward my attacker. Marcus never treated my disability as a burden, or acted like I should be grateful he stayed with me, and that made all the difference in how I saw myself. 2 years after that horrible intervention in my parents' living room, I work full-time at Brian's disability rights firm, helping other survivors escape toxic situations. Last week, a woman came to my office after her family pressured her to reconcile with the boyfriend who broke her spine, and I recognized that same desperate confusion I felt when my own family called that meeting. I told her about my journey and connected her with resources, and by the end of our session, she was crying, but also making plans to move into her own place. I still have hard days dealing with my disability and trauma, days when I'm exhausted from navigating a world designed for sighted people, or when phantom pains remind me of what Kevin took. But I'm living proof that your family's limitations don't have to define your future, that the people who love you most can sometimes hurt you worst, and that real love means supporting someone's independence instead of exploiting their vulnerability.